Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Clifford Stone. I was a Sergeant First Class, United States Army. I had a secret clearance with nuclear surety. I could get the clearance that I needed to do whatever it was that was necessary for me to do at the time on special operations when I was called in on those. What I'm referring to here is that I was involved in situations where we actually did recoveries of crashed saucers, for lack of a better term, debris thereof. There were bodies that were involved with some of these crashes, also some were alive. While we were doing all this, we were telling the American public there was nothing to it. We were telling the world there was nothing to it. I'd like to go into detail on some of the cases, about the nuts and bolts cases right here, but I will be available if you have any questions concerning my involvement in this. You can talk to Dr. Greer to arrange for me to get to talk to you. But the whole situation is, we've sat back, we've told the American people that there's no such thing as UFOs. I've been involved where we have recovered these objects. We know them to be of extraterrestrials. In 1969, I had an event that happened to me while I was stationed at Fort Lee, Virginia. We went to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. That would be my first exposure to any time that we would be recovering an unidentified flying object. When we went there, we already had people that was already in the facility. We were a backup team, which was supposed to be NBC, because there was supposed to be some nuclear materials that was on board this craft. Later on, most people involved would have been were to be told that there was nothing on board it. It was nothing more than just a crash of one of our aircraft. I know better, because I was one of the people that approached it with a Geiger counter to get surface readings. I was the first person to go ahead and see that there were bodies on it. That would be the first of approximately 12 events. UFO crashes are not events that take place every day. They're rare. I know we're not alone in the universe. I know that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's evidence that has been denied to the American people. I stand before you today in my almighty God, and I tell you this. If Congress calls me in and says, will you testify in detail what you know, I stand here today prepared and ready to do just that. Governments must never lie to the people for no reason. Thank you.
Hello, this is Mel Fabregas with Veritas, and I'm privileged and honored to be here with Sergeant Clifford Stone, Army retired. You may remember him from our interview back in 2009, a most excellent interview. So if you don't know who Sergeant Stone is, please go back to that interview to see the background. We'll speak a little bit of it, but I would highly recommend it. But first, welcome Clifford, and tell us a little bit about who you are, for those who may not be familiar with you.
My name's Clifford Stone. I retired in the U.S. Army as a Sergeant First Class. During my 10th-year service, which was 22 and a half years, from time to time, I'd be called in to assist with UFO cases, such as UFO crash retrievals, and also would be doing interfacing with the ETs that we'd become involved with in those crashes.
For those people who listen to the words crash retrieval, this might be new to some of them, but this is a very exciting career that you had back then. First of all, you mentioned at one point that there were X number of extraterrestrial races when you left the military. Has that changed in your opinion?
It possibly could have, but the time I got out, they had 57 that they'd cataloged. The reason there was a need to catalog those species and us have it in the field was so we would know what to do as first responders should any of the ETs be injured. First aid that we'd use on normal humans wouldn't always work for them. They had specific type of first aid that would have to be utilized to take care of them until the medical teams arrived on scene, if there was a need for a medical team.
Who was responsible for cataloging these races?
I'm not sure who it was that was responsible for doing that, but I assume that it would be within the medical command of the military to go ahead and do that, or the medical command of the intelligence community to ensure that it was cataloged.
Did you ever have any exposure to any of those reports, and did you see some of those ET races and their specifics?
Well, the book that I'm talking about, I saw that. I actually held that and got to go over it. But I could never keep a copy, and I only had exposure to it on several occasions. And that was by haphazard, because what I did, I didn't really have a need to know that information. But there were some people there who befriended me who let me see it.
Can you comment, if you recall, some of the information that you read about?
Well, some of the information dealt with, like I say, the first aid. And that was the primary reason that they were concerned about what we'd call first responders. Like, you could not use iodine to put on some cuts that they may have. You would have some special prepared compounds that you would use to put on those. And they would have those tagged and cataloged as to the various medications that you would use. You'd have I'm calling it this, it's not what they called it, an ET first aid kit. That would be marked in accordance with that manual. So you would know if this is the species, this is the material you would have to use. Stuff that we would do would actually go ahead and cause the injuries to be worse, and sometimes even cause the entity to die.
I'm trying to understand, if planet Earth is such a unique place where we have oxygen and we breathe the oxygen, but in turn that could be poisonous to an extraterrestrial race that I presume may breathe something different. So wouldn't the fact that they may crash here render them dead immediately because they can't breathe unless they have their own survival mechanism, as we would if we were going to another planet?
Or they have a means to go ahead and adapt themselves to breathing our air for a short period of time. And they do have that. And some of them have to use suits. So you have to be very careful if you decide to go ahead and, say, remove, for lack of a better term, the helmet of the spacesuit they have on.
Can you mention some of the... I'm sorry, go ahead. Finish.
The mere exposure to our air could actually kill them. But they had means to go ahead and adapt themselves for short periods of time. The oxygen as we breathed it isn't necessarily the way they would take in oxygen. Also, their primary gas that they would use in their atmosphere may be different than ours, and that would also create problems. But the only yardstick we have is a carbon-based life form. We now know of an arsenic-based life form that can go ahead and survive on arsenic. But there are other forms of life out there that can, for example, silicon is one of the basic life structures in some of the life forms that visit us. And some of them are just pure energy.
I'm just curious to know, from that book that you had an opportunity to read, could you mention what information? Did they have a picture of the ET race, and what columns and what information did you see on the titles?
They would have pictures, and some of them would just be the artist's concept. And they would go ahead and break them down by, like, well, everybody knows about the gray, so I guess I can use that. Like gray, type 1, gray, type 2, gray, type 3. Now, when you get into gray type 4, you have gray type 4A, gray type 4B. But I believe, I'm trying to call from memory here, there was about 8 different types of grays. The 3 that we primarily dealt with, was the first 3, type 1 through 3.
And column-wise, you're talking about the titles of each specific race, but did they show color?
Some of the pictures were black and white. Some of the pictures were in color. And, of course, the artist's conception, those were always in color.
But I'm referring to what attributes they had, average size, weight.
That would range.
Dangerous, benevolent, that kind of thing.
Nothing about whether they were friendly or foe.
Right.
Nothing about that type of category. We were always advised that not all encounters would be friendly.
Right.
And that goes back to the rogue element, not necessarily the actual species. But they would have the average weight, average height, because these would vary, just as it varies with us. Like the great type 2, average size 3 to 3.5 foot tall. Now it would vary. Not all of them would be 3 foot tall. Some would even be smaller. Not much smaller, but smaller. Some would be taller than 3.5 feet. Not a whole lot taller, but would be taller. They'd put the averages in there. For the type 3 gray, the average pound or type 2 gray. I'm trying to remember this from recollection, so I could be wrong, but I think it was about 80 pounds. They would go ahead. Of course, the picture spoke for itself, but they describe it as normally a very slender body with slender long arms, slender shorter legs. They would describe that these entities could have fingers from 3 to 5 fingers and an opposable thumb.
And did they, in one of the categories, did it show planet of origin?
I'm quite sure the planet of origin was there. But when I got to see it, I didn't get to go through it or study it. But I'm quite sure that they named the locations from which they came from. But it was very limited in information. The primary reason, once again, was for us to use it as a first responder book. It wasn't a know-all book. It was very limited in information as it applied to the medical care of the entities that we could possibly come in contact with.
How did we, and I presume that these entities are more advanced than us in many ways if they're able to come from point A to point B, meaning planet Earth, and we can't do that. Now, who's teaching us to take care of them medically?
I can't answer that question. I wouldn't know.
Okay.
But apparently there was some means of gathering that information. And the one thing I'd want to point out is that a crash is very, very unusual. For a UFO to land and one or more of the entities be left behind because we know there's a landing there and we respond to that landing, or one goes down because they're having mechanical problems and one or more get left behind as a result of us showing up on scene before they could get back to the craft. Now that also creates a medical emergency for them because we are going to search for them and we may have to render first aid because it's not going to be one of those situations where they want us to come into possession of them.
Good point. And you had a story to share during our last interview that I would like to repeat if you could. After you went through your training, at one point you were told, we have a gray extraterrestrial, he or EVE, who would like you to sit down and speak with him. Can you tell us once again that story?
Okay. Try to go by it real fast, and you know why. We went ahead and we got a gray. He was at a building. It was a wood building. The location's in Virginia. I'm not sure where at in Virginia. But it was a one-level wooden building. And they told me that we had one of our visitors here. He was a guest. And that they wanted me to do the interfacing with the ET that we had. So I went there, and as soon as I got there, they went ahead and took me into this room. There were several people in the room, and the guy mentioned something about I was the interfacer and I'd be trying to communicate with the entity we had there. The entity looked up at me, and, I remembered, I'm afraid. I picked up it. I could feel the fear. You could feel anything they felt. They were coming to get him. And the one thing that he didn't want was for them to come there, because the means that they would use to extract him from there could possibly cause the death of some of the people there. So I went ahead and told the person I always called the colonel that he wanted to tell me something. And it was very important that no one else be there. And that it's some risk involved, so everybody had to be fairly well distant from it. First, they wasn't real happy about doing that, but decided, okay, if there was a problem, they'd be right in. And I said, that's fine. I had a friend of mine who was there with me from the onset, and I told him, I don't care how you do it, but get me a pair of wire clippers and put them out in the back. So when everybody was gone, we went up through the back way, went to the fence line, cut a hole in the fence. The ET got out. As soon as he was 10, 15, 20 feet away from the fence line, one of the ships showed up, shined a beam of light down on him, and he disappeared in the light. Everyone was upset, even the one I called the colonel. And we had the discussion about, if he's a guest, why do we have armed guards on him?
That was my next question. If he was a guest, why was he there involuntarily?
And the whole situation is, he went ahead and told me, he says, okay, I'm not mad about you doing this, but next time, tell me before you do anything like this. And I said, something to the effect that if I'd have told you, this wouldn't have happened. And we could have had people, our people, that could have wound up casualties because they were going to get him, one way or the other. Well, I think he knew that, and I think they knew that beforehand. But I think that they were in agreement with me getting him outside the gate for whatever reason, because I'm sure if they didn't want that to happen, they would have had a whole lot more guards around the area, and there would have been no hesitation on shooting me to prevent that from happening, or even shooting the ET if they didn't want it to happen.
How do you think that extraterrestrial, how do we get them?
Oh, there are several ways, and always we say they're our guests. If there's a crash that should occur, and if there's living or dead, we will recover those bodies. We will try to treat the wounded, and we'll try to do some form of interrogation. A lot of times, like I say, we know of a landing that takes place, and we send a strike team out there to try to gather any evidence of it even being there. Even debris, not necessarily that it crashed, it just sat down there. And a lot of times, equipment will be left behind, or spare parts. There'll be physical traces there, things we can do chemical analysis on to try to gather more and more for our database on our visitors. But if we find out that there's one or more that's left behind, we will make an assertive effort to recover that ET. And I'm quite sure that we all know that they are going to try to recover that ET. They're not just going to say, oh, well, he got captured by them, he's a write-off. It don't work that way. So the scenario I just gave you, it's not the only one.
How did that particular ET get there?
I believe this particular ET is actually left behind. I don't think that they were going to go ahead and purposely leave him there, and I don't think it was because of a crash. I truly believe that he got left behind because we showed up before he could get back to the craft.
And how do we can we say the word capture? How do we capture a lost ET as this one could have been captured?
Well, most of the times they're not going to resist. They're passive. And we say, you know, they're weak and all this. They're not weak. They can fight back. I guarantee you that little ET had a weapon that if he wished to defend himself, he could have. And we would have never captured him.
Was he dressed in uniform?
Oh, he had the tight-fitting, we call it flight suit, but the tight-fitting space clothes. And that was like a spindly silver type suit he had on.
How tall?
Oh, this one was roughly about 3.5 to 4 foot tall.
And I surmise that you made a connection with them. And how were you two communicating?
Well, it sounded like you and I are talking right now, only all the exchanges was taking place in our head. But it, you know, you couldn't, if you was the recipient of the message being transmitted, it sounded just like the ET was talking in English to me. And to him, it sounded the same way. But I'd caution that's technology. But they use that technology to amplify the ESP powers that everybody has. But being an interface, you can't train that. You can train a person to be a remote viewer. Normally it took 2 years to train a remote viewer. Then 1 year of service for that person. Then they had to be reassigned or they would hurt their military career because they couldn't stay stagnant in a assignment for more than 3 years because they wanted all this additional exposure to having command, things of this sort. So they wanted you to have a diversity in the various training you got by various assignments you got. So they did not want you stationed one location at one time for too awful long of a period. And at that time, 3 years was it. It would even damage you getting promotions if you stayed in one geographical location for too long or one assignment for too long. So that created a problem for the people who was working Stargate. Now, remote viewing is one thing. Interfacing was entirely different. Interfacing, you had to have a person who could go ahead and not be outside the box, so to speak. They had to be able to feel and express the emotions. Excuse me. This came about also with our visitors.
You were an interface.
Yes.
Okay.
And this came about also with our visitors selecting people at a very young age that they wanted to follow throughout life so they could learn about our societies, our cultures. And they felt the best way to do that was for them to pick one person and there be like some type of relationship between that one person and one of their own. One big thing is the ET is going to live long enough to mourn the death of the person that he has that relationship with, or he or she, because there is male and female in many of the races. So with that, they would learn a whole lot about our cultures. And this has been going on for some time. This goes back to ancient times. It's nothing new. Most of the time, people that are having these experiences, they don't talk. That creates a problem for the governments of the world. Because in order to have any type of dialogue, you have to have the interfacers. Without the interfacers, you don't have that real open dialogue.
First of all, who is identified as you were identified as a prospective interfacer? How can the military pinpoint this person is going to be an interfacer? Do they follow you from an early age?
Well, with me, they did. With me, I was visited about a week or so after my first daylight UFO sighting, up close and personal. And this was by a guy by the name of Captain Brown. When he showed up, He stayed with me all the way till 68. In 68, allegedly, he got killed in a crash of a T-33. How they go ahead and identify who these people are, I don't know how that works. How they even knew about me, I don't know. But I do know it was dead reckoning I'd be in the military. When I got in, it was like going in like any other soldier, per se. Only thing is, I was restricted to what I could go into. They wanted to be the admin field. Hence, I went into the admin field. And it provided a good cover, but also it did something else. It provided flexibility to assign me where they believe they may be having an ongoing series of situations that I may be needed.
At one point, you were going to be recruited by the Air Force, right?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, when I got my notice and went in for my physical to see if I could be drafted, still had the same medical problem. Then was given the choice, if you really want to go in. Of course I did, because I was very much believed God, country, mom's apple pie, and I had an obligation to go in.
Yeah.
So I was for it. So they said, okay, if you want to go in, how do you want? Do you want to be drafted or do you want to enlist? I'll enlist. And I even told them, well, what I want to be, I want to go ahead and go in for the Warrant Officers Flight Aviation Program. And oh, no, we can't do that. Your exposure of you having the illness, too risky. We need to keep you and put you in admin. Okay. But, I've never liked being in an office. I don't like typing. Oh, don't worry about it. An MOS is just something you have to have. You'll do other things. Anyhow, to this day, when I supposedly got out of the administration, the typing school there at Fort Jackson, I could type, I think, 78 words a minute, according to the paper. First thing I did when I got to my first unit, 36 Civil Affairs, at Fort Lee, Virginia, I told my first sergeant, I think you should know right now, First Sergeant, I can't type. He took my records in, showed them to the unit commander. The unit commander looked at him, came back out and says, are you colorblind? I said, no, sir. He said, are you sure? I said, yes, sir. He said, okay, what color's your uniform? Green, sir. He says, okay, just checking. Well, he'd already picked up on my enlistment contract, the DD Form 4, which actually stated that I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force for a period of 3 years. That 3 years would be very crucial. When I went ahead and took my OIC to a place there at Fort Belvoir, and that was the first time we got to see film footage of UFOs and what appeared to be aliens. We couldn't hear what was being said, but we were looking down on it. Then I went through the intensified debriefing as a result of that. I think that was meant to happen so they could draw me into the program. But when I went back to my unit, after 5 days and 4 nights of intensified debriefing, I was also told never talk about what happened. Well, I was taken back on a Friday night. On the Saturday morning following, I was called down to the charge of quarters to go to the first sergeant's office. So I went there, and the 3 same guys that was involved, the 2 guys, the one guy that was always just taking notes, very silent, never said a word. He wasn't there. The 2 guys that was doing the interrogation, they were there. And they started playing good cop, bad cop. And they said, you were AWOL for 5 days. We got to find out what happened. And, remember, I'm not supposed to say anything about what happened. And I kept saying I wasn't AWOL. I was doing my duty. Then immediately they started to make it clear that no, we need to know what happened. So finally, with a little nervous laughter, I said, you guys were there, you know what happened. And one guy went ballistic, even threatening to shoot me. But it calmed down. All I had to do was agree to work with the program, something I already had an interest in. And by the end of the year, it'd be out anyhow.
Play the game.
That was it. And this was 1969. Condon Committee report was already done. We didn't really know what Condon was going to say. At the time, I felt, unless Condon was an idiot, he's going to see UFOs are interplanetary. And at that time, I didn't know all the stuff that I know now. But I knew enough that there was more to UFOs than what the government was saying. And I couldn't understand why the government wasn't coming out and telling the truth. So I figured, okay, fine. At the end of the year, everyone's going to know anyhow. So being a part of it, that was thrilling to me. I even got to take a book home. And I showed it to some of my friends while I was there. And I told them, hey, guess what? I'm in the Army, but I'm involved in UFO investigations. And we are involved in some really big things here.
Were you allowed to?
Oh, they let me do it. There's a Tonda Davis. I think she lives in Columbus, Ohio right now. If you could locate her. I don't have it on me right now, but my cousin Larry, he got to see some things. And he got to see some things when I was a kid growing up too. But I'm quite sure he'd tell you about some of that stuff. There was a Delbert Hudson who got to see this material. There was Kenneth Cagley, but he got killed in an auto accident. But I was showing quite a few people this stuff that I had and told them what I was doing.
What did they say when you told them?
Well, they were taken back by it because they knew I always had an interest. Mm-hmm. And, you know, now they knew somebody was working in it. That was a little thrilling to them. But they got to see pictures that no one else is ever going to get to see. I couldn't make copies. And as a matter of fact, there was even in a book, what do you call it? A book that you put pictures in, a scrapbook.
Yep.
And the book was made by Hallmark. It was a blue and white book, and it had Blue Book on it. And it was the trade name for the Hallmark scrapbook.
But it had nothing to do with
nothing with Blue Book itself. Project Blue Book had nothing to do to getting to the bottom line of what UFOs were, neither.
Right.
It was a public relations program that was to provide. I wish for the public to see, so they could say, see, the Air Force is really investigating these things, and we're not finding anything. Behind the scenes, Air Force intelligence and the intelligence communities within the Air Force was gathering the hard evidence. The Air Force says they've released all of their documentation.
So this was, Project Blue Book was mainly to vent steam from the people who demanded investigations on UFOs, but it was nothing different than the Warren Commission with the Kennedy assassination or the 9/11 Commission report. Basically, it's just to say that we're doing something.
Oh, absolutely. And a point in case, Warren Commission. The Warren Commission had a very limited definition of conspiracy. And they could not conclude, because of that definition, that there was a conspiracy. And I have the 80,000 pages of the Warren Commission on CD, actually 3 CDs because it's so large. People, when they bought the book, that wasn't the whole Warren Commission. That was just the report, the testimony, the evidence. All of that makes up the Warren Commission report. But they had a very limited definition. So they could not go ahead and conclude that there was a conspiracy or even a possibility of conspiracy. A year or so later, they went ahead, well, it was several years later, they did the Commission on Assassinations. Now, the definition was much broader. And the Kennedy assassination, among others, was looked at that time. And there were people who were on that commission who refused to sign it because they were refusing to conclude that there was a conspiracy that had taken place in the Kennedy assassination. And unless you read these documents, you never know that. We know how to manipulate the media because we are going to tell the media, and we are going to give them certain pages of a document and say, here, read this. If you read the whole document, it says something entirely different. There were two reports that were released on the incident at Roswell, New Mexico. The media, being so narrow-minded in their search for the truth, changed what the Air Force said. The Air Force never said it was a Project Mogul balloon. The Air Force didn't ignore the bodies. Now, the people who were involved later on after they got out, but they couldn't do it because it wasn't proper protocol. After they got out, they said, well, all the witnesses were lying. That's not the way the Air Force could handle it. The Air Force said they have searched everything that they possibly could. They had top secret documents that they looked at. They had sensitive compartment information documents, and they could find nothing that could explain what it was, with the exception of one thing. It could have probably have been a Project Mogul device. And these were a series of high-altitude balloons with a series of Raman radar target reflectors attached to them that we were going to send up over the Soviet Union and hopefully get pictures of what was going on within their nuclear program. Now, they did not say that absolutely is what it was. They said the best conclusion they could come up with is that it was probably a Project Mogul device, which is why they really didn't want to talk about it, which is why there was that aurora of secrecy. The other report, which had to answer the bodies, there were two crashes that took place out of Roswell Army Air Force Base, Walker Air Force Base. One was of a KC-97, and one was of a KC-135. There was a total of 27 people killed in both of those crashes, and the bodies were badly burnt. So the Air Force chose to say, through the fog of time, the witnesses compressed 12 years into that 1 or 2 days in July, or that week in July. And they wasn't lying, but they may have seen the bodies. And since they were so ghastly burnt and bloated, because the body will bloat when it's burnt, that they saw this, and also Project Mannheim. I can't remember the name of the gentleman that jumped from, I think it was 100,000 feet or something like that. He got injured and his head swelled up. And they may have seen him coming in there to be treated at the medical center there at Roswell Army Airfield at the time. And they, put all of these events together due to the fog of time and came up with the ETs. Well, the people who saw the ETs, they've been consistent in what they saw. Mac Brazel, when he went to talk about the balloon he recovered, he had 2 CIC agents with him. And if anybody bothers to read the whole article, when he was, the article was put the very next day, I believe it was, the 9th of July, where Rancher tells of finding the balloon. He goes ahead, and now it wasn't last week that he found it. Now it was around June 14th, 2 weeks or so before 3 weeks before he came in. Very important to change the date, because at that time they could have actually put a balloon in close proximity. But the whole situation is anybody there on the base would have recognized a balloon, a weather balloon, period. Hands down. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to recognize that's what it was. He felt that he had found something extraordinary. He had found many other balloons before, and he states so in the article. But this one he felt was something different. And even if it was from Project Mogul, you might have 4 or 5 balloons, up to 11 balloons, and ask, why is it there are so many balloons? It might be puzzling that there were so many balloons, but you'd readily recognize them as weather balloons. Raw on target, same thing. And he had found, in several months prior to finding this, he had found 3 or 4 weather balloons. But he ends by saying this: if I ever find anything out there on the ranch again being short of an atomic bomb, I will never report it. That was a statement made, what he went through. And no one caught it. And I'll tell you something else. After the Roswell crash occurred, they successfully kept it quiet. But there were people out there who wanted to run scams on getting exotic devices off of the UFOs, who wanted to run scams off of knowing of crashes of UFOs. What state did they pick? New Mexico. Why? They heard about the Roswell crash, but they also knew that the Air Force proved it was a weather balloon with a raw one target attached to it. So they never named Roswell.
Plus, they crashed test dummies that didn't come out until the 50s, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, that goes into the 12-year period time. And, yep, they included the dummies, too, that the people may have seen.
Right.
The whole gauntlet of what happened in that 12 years, they covered and said, fog of time, people compressed it to the couple of days or that week in July of 47. But these guys that were running the scam programs, had they went ahead and tried to pull the ultimate scam based on half-truths at the time, they would have blown Roswell wide open. Had the person, Newton Salas was one of them. He talked about crash saucers. Well, and he even at one time, I think, took it to Utah and said that 3 of them crashed there. Had he went ahead and put it, well, they say it was a balloon, but no, I know it wasn't. The media would have asked more questions that the government was not prepared to answer. But it didn't happen that way. They put it someplace else because they believed what the Air Force said. But in those 2 reports that the Air Force did, I believe both of them to be honest men, even though later on they came out and said all the witnesses were just lying. Why do they say that? They didn't believe their own report. They did not believe that they were mistaken by the fog of time. They believed they were out and out lying. But they couldn't put that in a report.
So what do you think was the main motivator to keep Roswell a secret? And I believe it was Truman who catapulted MJ-12, Majestic 12, to keep this aura of secrecy.
Well, MJ-12 I've never had exposure to. Is it called that? I don't know. Do I question some of the MJ-12 documents? Yes, I do. Is there an organization similar to MJ-12? Oh, you betcha. There is a very small number of people that keep this information very tightly guarded. And as far as keeping it a secret, it's not being kept a secret. We choose not to believe the facts. What was his name? On 60 Minutes. He just died here recently. Rooney was his last name.
Rooney, yes, the reporter.
Yes. He said it best.
Andy Rooney.
Andy Rooney. He said it best. He said, people are willing to accept the facts when they are presented to them, but only if the people believe those facts to be true in the first place. In other words, it's got to be part of their perception of reality. If it's outside of their perception of reality, they question even the facts. But in this case, going back to the two men, the major and the lieutenant that did the reports, I believe them to be honest men. And I premise what I'm about to say with that statement in that I don't believe either one of them would tell you that they saw any documentation whatsoever dealing with Project Moondust or Operation Blue Fly. I have documentation, and now I have documentation going into the 50s, where Moondust is named in recovering unidentified flying objects.
Can you give us a quick summary of what those two projects are?
Moondust is the overfill of the overall field exploitation program of the recovery of objects of non-U.S. origin that survives re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere and crash lands on Earth, are objects of unknown origin that crashes on Earth. Operation Blue Fly is the overall field exploitation of those objects to get them moved from the location where they're at to a safe haven area where they can be more closely examined. And there's a whole new criteria comes into play as soon as we realize we recovered an object that did not originate on the face of this earth. Now, when I got Congress to try to go after those documents, initially, the member of the Senate that I was working with, the Air Force, said those missions never existed, and there never was a project or a unit at Fort Belvoir that would even deal with that type of material. After I sent documents showing they were wrong, they came back and apologized for getting it wrong the first time and amended what they said the first time and acknowledged, yeah, Moondust existed, Blue Fly existed, but they didn't have documents. Well, this was in 1994 when I got that response back. 91 to 92, they were sending me responses back saying they had information that was classified and could not be released because it was classified material. They even at one time stating that they could neither confirm nor deny the existence, which that meant they had documentation that was CSI material. Because if it's under the sensitive compartmented information, that is the response you will give. We may neither deny nor confirm the existence or non-existence of that material. Pretty much like the story of when I was going through the problems I was going through while I was in the military from 87 to, from 86 to 87 into a little into 88. But when the media picked up on the fact that there was something going on with me about them trying to force my retirement because I was actively involved in UFO research, trying to get documents to release to the public, and was talking to the media. And I had to say I was a private citizen at that time, which I did. I never brought into play about what I did until after the death of my son. And then, no, all holds barred, you know. Nothing was going to hold me back. But when they hit up on that saying they didn't have anything, it was dead reckoning to get the documentation showing that we did use this. And of course, they made it clear, well, if there's any UFOs that went down, then Blue Book or Moondust would have been involved, but none went down. That's an out-and-out lie. And the documents aren't classified. And we have the stuff from the DIA. We have the stuff from the State Department. Now we're getting stuff from the Air Force that they kind of overlooked and didn't think about removing it. What is missing, though, in all of these cases is the finalized intelligence product that once and for all says what these things were that they recovered. The British did a report, a secret report, released it December 2000. It's out there now. There's a lot of places that are marked out in it. But the one thing that they didn't, they had in here that the wasn't known to a lot of people, because I don't think a lot of people read the stuff, but they should, because that's where you get your information. Volume 2 of that British report has it in there where they're talking about metallic fragments that were recovered. The British say they never got anything. They don't know about the Soviet Union. But the U.S., it was a mystery to them why the U.S. did not come out and explain the metallic objects that they had recovered and put to bed once and for all the E.T. hypothesis. Well, they can't come out and explain those. To do so would do the exact reverse. It would prove that some of these things we recovered were of extraterrestrial origin. But saying that they didn't use it, now we have, like right now, I have about 20 documents in going from the late 40s into the mid 50s, reflecting recoveries of unidentified flying objects. These are not part of Project Blue Book, but close. But they make reference to these, but it in short, what was it they recovered? That right there, another agency was dealing with and did not become a part of these records. And the Air Force Continental Intelligence Command at the time was the ones really coordinating the UFO investigation. Not Blue Book. They have records to this date, remain classified, and have never seen the light of day. The 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron, known over the years by many different names, but same animal, okay? They have records to this date, have not seen the light of day. Yet they're mentioned being involved with some of these UFO recoveries. No finalized intelligence product, though. And the records I'm talking about are not in Blue Book files. The Blue Book files that were there at Wright-Patterson. The certain bits and pieces of information would be sent there, but you had an element of the Air Force Continental Intelligence Command right there. You had a detachment of the 4602nd right there. When they sent it to Wright-Patterson, as required by Air Force Regulation 200-2, as required by Air Force Regulation 200-2, everybody thought it was going to Blue Book. If it was a mundane case, let it slide. Go to Blue Book. But if it was some special, spectacular case, that don't happen. 1957, a RB-47 picked up a UFO on radar. It was observed by several of the crew. It followed that RB-47 across 3 or 4 different states: Mississippi, Alabama, Texas. Should be in Blue Book files. When the Condon Committee started to look into UFOs, some of the military people who were involved in that case wrote to Condon and told him about that event. Dr. James McDonald had already talked about it, and he also pointed it out. And in the Condon report, they make it clear they went to the Blue Book files and it wasn't there. Where did they find it? It was a file that the U.S. Air Force Intelligence Command had, but it was top secret. They had to go ahead, downgrade it, to secret. Then they went ahead and declassified it. But that wasn't the whole report. That was bits and pieces of it. But enough to make it look like it was all there. So they could release it to Condon. Anything that was top secret or SCI, the Condon Committee couldn't have access to. Then the NSA finally released documentation. And there are many cases in there involving the military, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army. And those cases never made it to the Blue Book files. Yet they were cases that were reported during the time of Blue Book's existence and activities. But they never made it to Blue Book. But they did make it within the intelligence community, i.e. the Air Force Intelligence Security Service, the Air Force Security Command, OSI, even the Army has records they haven't released. They released old records of the CIC, and those aren't even complete. There are files dealing with UFO sightings that took place in Vietnam, and I can prove those exist.
And I remember you mentioned one time where you were taken, not knowing your destination, but you were taken to this jungle and to this clearing, and there was a plane.
A B-52.
B-52 would have been impossible to land there, but it was positioned there.
It was like a giant hand just set it down.
Tell us more about that story.
We were told we were going on a field training exercise, and we were told that we were going on the field training exercise to Florida. Well, we flew for quite some time. When we landed to refuel, why do you need to refuel? I mean, Virginia's up here, Florida's down here. Right. It was a commercial airliner. We shouldn't have a need to refuel. But it wasn't the whole unit. It was select people. Anyhow, when we landed, when I say it wasn't my whole unit. I was the only one from my unit. I take that back. There was another guy. There was a guy by the name of Ski. He was a military policeman, and he was brought along. But he and I were the only ones from my unit, 36 Civil Affairs. So we landed. When we landed, they told us we had to stay on the plane while they refueled. No one was to get off, which is unusual because normally when you're fueling a plane, everybody gets off.
Right. In
the event there's a mishap. So we all stayed on the plane. One person looked out the window, and he said, if this isn't Oakland, meaning Oakland, California, I'll kiss your hindsight. At which time, the guy I always called the colonel went ahead, pulled out his .45, chambered around. Next person opens their mouth, I will personally shoot. Well, it got quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. But after this happened, he told us, you'll be fully briefed once we're airborne again. So once we got airborne, several hours out, I don't know if anyone looked out the window to see if we were flying over water or not, but several hours out, he went ahead, advised us we would have to go and check on an aircraft because we're going to be recovering it that may have nuclear devices on it. And we got to make sure they're safe. That's where we're going. However, the aircraft went down in a country that's not friendly to the U.S. So we have to be very stealthy. He didn't use the word stealthy, but the same difference. Very, very careful how we do this. We need to avoid any exposure to any of the people there in that country.
He didn't specify what country.
He didn't specify what country. He never acknowledged what country, even after it was a done deal. When I went back to Vietnam, I know the air base we landed in. I'm pretty sure, I can't say for a fact, but I'm pretty sure it's Cambodia we went to. Probably in the area it's known as the Parrots Peak region is where we probably went. But at darn sure was Benoit Air Force Base we landed. And when I went back to Vietnam, I visited Benoit many, many times. And I'm certain that's where we landed. Anyhow, before we landed, they gave us a plastic bag. We were to cut off the U.S. Army and our name tag and cut off we had chevrons that was sewed on. We had to cut those off. We had to cut off our unit. If people had been to Vietnam and had a combat patch, They had to remove the combat patch. All of that had come off.
By the way, don't mean to interrupt you. This is so interesting. We have 3 minutes on this tape. Do you mind proceeding with a second tape to make it a full
Go right ahead.
interview? Okay, so we have 3 minutes. I'll let you know when there's 1 minute left.
And then we had to take everything out of our pockets. Anything that would identify us. Everything had to go. And we went ahead so that we had a piece of tape. We signed our name on it. Then we went ahead and left that plastic bag on board the commercial aircraft. When we got off the aircraft, there were 2 helicopters waiting for us. We loaded on the helicopters. Then we went to an area where we sat down and we set up a camp. We call it a staging area. And we walked, I don't know, maybe 5, maybe 10 miles into the jungle. We came up on this clearing where this B-52 was just set down on the ground. And, we're looking, there should have been trees messed up. The plane should have been 100,000 pieces.
It was intact.
But it was intact, short of what appeared to be shrapnel.
Shrapnel.
Possibly from a SAM missile.
Right.
Or several SAM missiles. The crew was dead, but the crew was dead because of the shrapnel, nothing out of the ordinary. But I'd, never seen a B-52 before up close. And I always thought, gee, they were bigger than this. So, with curiosity, I was walking around the craft. As soon as I walked around to the back of the craft, I went ahead. These aliens, grays, for lack of a better term, roughly 3.5 foot tall, came out and stated, "Clifford, what are you doing here? You are not supposed to be here." And I freaked out. I brought down my M16 and I fired. I don't know if I was the first to fire because everyone was firing at that time.
Sorry to interrupt. This is such a cliffhanger. We have to proceed to segment 2. But I want you to tell the audience, how do people learn more of your work? You have a new book out, right?
Right.
What is the name of the new book?
It's called Eyes Only, the Clifford Stone Story, and the story of crash UFO retrievals. I don't even remember the name of my book.
And how do people get it?
From Amazon.com.
And we'll have it linked on our website in case you didn't give the proper title. But I'm here with Sergeant Clifford Stone, retired from the Army. It's such a pleasure once again. And when we come back, he's going to tell us a lot that he learned after he left the military. We're calling this interview a mini disclosure interview. So much more when we come back. This is Mel Fabregas, and you're listening or watching to Veritas. Don't go anywhere.